Hi, welcome everyone, and we are live on our second conversation for change for the year. Welcome to everyone viewing us, those who follow us, who are the disruptors, the change makers, professionals who are really, you're serious about thinking about how we can make the world a better place, how you can leverage your expertise and show up more powerfully. You're not just focused on, making money or moving up the corporate ladder. You want to do that, but you also want to, join a community of professionals who are trying to, you know, make impact at the same time. So welcome everyone to this conversation.
Conversation for change. Also, we kind of want to make sure that with us, the solution is kind of provided to everybody who's thinking about solutions being put on the market. So all the startups, creators, or all the NGOs, anyone who has some innovation that is fairly new and has not been built around some legal frameworks already. We know that that can be a bit of a pain in the ass, to use that word. So whenever you're entering the market and there is no laws, this is where we kind of come in. Not just the lawyers, but really all the professionals, kind of making sure that there is an interdisciplinary dialogue to co-create a better future and to co-create some low risks or some certainty around the solutions that we are creating. So thank you all for jumping in and joining this conversation for change.
And we have a conversation today that I'm very excited about. It's all about getting serious about policy entrepreneurship. And policy entrepreneurship is a term people may not be too familiar with, or may have misunderstandings about. And so right at the top, I wanted to share with you how we at Future Law view policy entrepreneurship. We see policy entrepreneurs as visionary and energetic actors who engage in collaborative efforts and negotiations in and around government to promote policy innovations, just simply like that, building off of Mintrom's work in 2019. And today's conversation is particularly exciting because we have two amazing, who I would call policy entrepreneurs. They may not call themselves that, but they are at the front lines of advocating for criminalizing ecocide at the International Criminal Court level. And I'll let Anja introduce our amazing guests today.
Absolutely. And just before I start with them, I'm actually going to be briefly introducing myself and Margaret here. We are the co-founders of Future Law Institute. You can see our logo
Oh yeah,
in the back.
yeah.
Just for those who don't know us just yet, my name's Anja Blij. I'm from Slovenia. I'm a lawyer. I sometimes introduce myself as a global lawyer, sometimes as a crypto lawyer, and other times as space lawyer. So all the questions open. And my co-founder, Margaret Rosgara, do you just want to share a couple of words with us about yourself?
Hi, yeah, I thought everybody knew me here. Totally arrogant there, right? Yeah, from Trinidad and Tobago, been a lawyer for the last 25, maybe 26 years. Now that we're in 2021, my focus traditionally has been in the field of anti-corruption, public procurement law, public sector governance generally, and yeah, co-founded Future Law with Anja.
Right. So with us today, we are having Jojo Mehta. She's basically a chair of world's Stop Ecocide Foundation, and she's actually here with us because she's pioneering in this space. She co-founded this foundation with Polly Higgins. We all know about her, hopefully. Otherwise, we're going to be sharing some TED Talks and some of the links to Ecocide Foundation. We are basically here to really learn more about this crime of ecocide, and this is where she meets Kate Mackintosh. Kate Mackintosh herself is a highly respected lawyer in the international ecosystem, and she's a executive director of the Promise Institute for Human Rights, UCLA. Why we know her and why we want to hear these ladies speak about the ecocide is because they have been working hard with the lawyers behind the scenes and are bringing this forth. So I'm actually going to be giving you the stage. Kate and Jojo, thank you for joining us again. We've been having lots of conversation in the past, but now I hope to really touch the bases again with you. Welcome.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
And what was really striking today, right before our conversation, we got word. Jojo, you may have known. Of course, I thought you started sharing it about this action that was just brought before the International Criminal Court, crimes against humanity by the Brazilian Indigenous Chiefs, against the president of Brazil. Could you tell us a little more about that as we kick off this conversation and what that means? But also I wanted to understand what that means in the context of us promoting this criminalization of ecocide. What's the difference between going that route and ecocide, that kind of thing? So Jojo and Kate, welcome, and thought I'll kick it off there.
Well, fair enough. Shall I go first on that? I think it's very exciting that this case has been brought to the ICC, and we've known about it in the background, that it's been being prepared over the last year or so. And with Bolsonaro, there's obviously been a huge amount of comment and despair, really, around the policies that he's introduced in Brazil and that have had such a drastic effect on increasing deforestation and increasing persecution and displacement of indigenous communities. And so this case that's been filed is kind of it's a sort of a combined narrative around crimes against humanity, but also ecocide. But because obviously ecocide is not yet a crime at the ICC, it's kind of a way of bringing it into that discourse. Because of course, if ecocide had already existed as an international crime, there is absolutely no doubt that both of those crimes would be part of that case filing. And in a way, it's kind of tragic that the ecocides that have been going on in the Amazon and the deforestation levels there have reached the point where the suffering of the people and the native communities is such that actually many aspects of crimes against humanity as it stands are also kind of checked off by this behavior. And so, from the perspective of our campaign and from Stop Ecocide, if ecocide were in place, this would also potentially have been able to be intervention much earlier in this whole saga. And Kate may have some more comments on the more sort of legal aspects.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there've been a number of cases filed. What happens actually at the International Criminal Court is that victims can just submit information about, or anyone can submit information about crimes that they think have occurred. And the prosecutor will look at that and decide whether or not she thinks it meets the criteria to open an investigation. So that's what's happened here. So there've been a number of groups, affected populations, lawyers, NGOs that have submitted situations of mass environmental damage that we would characterize as ecocide to the International Criminal Court and have tried to characterize it as one of the existing crimes. So there's actually been a complaint about the situation in Brazil, which is alleging genocide as well, for example. There have been complaints about the situation in Ecuador, the massive Chevron disaster in Ecuador, and there's been a complaint filed by one of our colleagues about Cambodia and about deforestation and land grabbing and how that is causing environmental damage. But those have to fit into the existing crimes. And one of the main reasons that we're so committed to getting ecocide introduced is that the current crimes are not designed in such a way to really address the major kind of environmental damage that we're facing today. So the crimes against humanity provision that we're talking about here with this latest complaint that Jojo was just talking about, a crime against humanity is a widespread or systematic, I should say, attack on a civilian population. So the destruction of the Amazon, has to be characterized as an attack on a civilian population. And you can already see, ways in which it might be possible to do that and ways in which it might not. I mean, there are acts that will be able to be captured by that and acts that won't. So the crime of ecocide really fills a gap and will enable, depending on the definition, of course, but in our vision, will enable those kind of massive destruction of the environment to be prosecuted per se.
Going back to the definition, or just noticing that there's a wordplay, ecocide and genocide, and knowing that you've been working closely with the tribunal for former Yugoslavia. There's a court for Rwanda. I can't help but think, is it going to be the same way? Are we going to have a separate court for that type of a crime? How is it going to go down? And what parallels do you actually draw from working with cases on genocide or working on that type of a criminal court and the work that you might be doing around ecocide in the future?
So the word ecocide, and I think Jojo's going to talk about this later in the masterclass as well, I mean, is of course inspired by the word genocide, and that brings a lot of power with it. In terms of and the concept, eliminating a whole human group, which genocide would be, ecocide, immediately people think, eliminating the ecosystem, eliminating the planet. It has a kind of immediate resonance. In terms of the court, I mean, what we're working on is an amendment to the Rome Statute. So we're working on bringing this crime into the system of the International Criminal Court, which, by the way, is a system that operates also domestically. Right? States that sign up to the International Criminal Court also prosecute those crimes at home. So it's more than just one court in The Hague. So that's what we're aiming for. The courts like the Yugoslavia Tribunal and the Rwanda Tribunal were set up before there was an International Criminal Court, and they were set up, well, it was miraculous that they were set up at all. I mean, those were the pioneering courts, the first since Nuremberg, and they were set up because of the extremity of the situations of the war in Yugoslavia and the genocide in Rwanda. And they were also set up because there was a political opportunity to do that because of the moment, because of the 1990s, the end of the Cold War, and some kind of collaboration. I mean, in theory, with the International Criminal Court, there shouldn't be a need for more of these ad hoc local courts. I mean, people can debate that. It might be that it might be that it works in some ways to have something, some kind of ad hoc court in the future. But in theory, it would be nice in terms of not fragmenting the international law if everything could plug into this same system, albeit working at the national level, wherever possible. But you also raise a question about whether there should be a separate court to look at environmental crimes and ecocide. And as I said, that's not our project because we're really keen to get that included in the International Criminal Court statute. But that's certainly an interesting idea. People have written about that, have thought about it, have talked about advantages like you could have the judges be more specialized in environmental matters, for example. There could be some advantages to that system. It's not what we're working on right now, but it definitely offers some possibility.
I do want to go back to something that you mentioned there because, it jumps out at me because of where I'm from, Trinidad and Tobago, and we rely heavily on fossil fuels and all of that. So this case, crime against humanity, was by the Indigenous Chiefs was brought because, as you defined it, there was widespread or an allegation of widespread and systematic attack on a civilian population. It seems, that criminalizing such an act, a crime against humanity, defined in that way, seems reasonable. It seems something that, a lot of people can get on board with. I'm thinking, and I know we'll get more into this during the masterclass, that defining ecocide as a crime would arguably capture more than that. And I don't know if you could just give us a little taste. I know we'll go deeper into it in the masterclass as to, how much more we're looking at there. What's the scope? How far are we going to go? Because does it mean that corporations that are involved in the fossil fuel industry right now would immediately be liable in this way, criminally liable in this way?
Jojo, do you want to have a go at that one?
Oh, we can.
Are you muted, Jojo?
Sorry, yeah, something was happening in the background. Classic video mistake. So, I think with this question, there are a couple of things that come into play. So one of them is the the time that it takes to put something like this in place, and whether, and the fact that criminal law doesn't act retroactively. So what we're really aiming to do with putting in place a law that criminalizes a certain level of harm is, and doing it in the particular route that we're following with the ICC, one of the advantages of approaching it at the international level and at the International Criminal Court in particular in this way is that there is a particular set of procedures that have to be followed in order for an amendment to be made to the Rome Statute, which is the governing document. And that means it takes time. And that's actually very important, because when this sort of becomes visible, and actually it's already becoming so in the sense that the conversation is expanding quite fast on a global level around ecocide, what you're starting to sort of see is people looking at this as something that's coming over the horizon. So when it comes to polluting corporations, part of the, in the way that the intention is to kind of bring everybody with us on this, because we're obviously addressing, a global threat in terms of ecosystem harm, is for those players to see this coming and to basically be treating the period between, now as the beginning of the conversation, or potentially, a proposal that gets put into the ICC, the period between that and it actually becoming ratified and enforced as pretty much a compliance period, so that adjustments can actually be made to operate in a different way. And, we're aware that different parts of the world will perceive this in different ways according to the sort of economic development position that they're at and so on. And we can perhaps address this a little more in depth later. But I think that what we're primarily, that there are sort of different levels at which one can see this being addressed. And Kate can perhaps speak to perhaps the more legal detail. But for example, one of the things that would be immediately apparent is that how business practices are carried out would have to change quite drastically, in the sense that, things like if a CEO is going to become personally liable for the effects of a serious oil spill, for example, you would see safety protocols being followed and played out in a very different way to the current situation. I mean, that is just a sort of, an initial toe in the water with this question. But I think there are a number of things to address, but yeah.
Yeah, thanks so much for that. I just felt we wanted to just, I hope I didn't put you on the spot with that question, but just, with that action that was brought today, just putting side by side what ecocide would mean and the existing crime for humanity, and just looking at that way. So we can go deeper into conversation on it in the masterclass. So I don't want to stress you any further on this, because in this conversation with you two, we really wanted to go behind the work and get to know you both, because you all, the courage and the resilience that you all are, showing and demonstrating right now in this advocacy on ecocide is really tremendous. And I know a lot of people may be looking on and thinking, how can I get involved? How did you get here? Why did you get here? Why is this so important to you? And so maybe I can turn to Kate and say, Kate, you've been at the forefront of developing international criminal law in different ways. How did you become that? You qualified as a lawyer. What was your trajectory and getting you now to this whole movement in ecocide?
Oh, wow. So that's, I've been around for a while. So that's a long story. But
highlights.
Yeah, the international criminal law thing. So I did a history degree and I wanted to work in human rights. And I graduated in like the middle of the gloomiest part of Thatcher's Britain, and there were just like no jobs at all. And I did things like wrote with my history degree to Amnesty International applying for a job as a researcher. It's just funny when I think about it now. Like now I know who those people are, and how well qualified they are. So in the end, and then I thought, well, maybe I should do a law conversion, as you can do in the UK, because it's postgrad sort of crash course law degree. And then maybe I can get a job in human rights, basically. I was working in a law firm in London, qualifying, and saw an ad which said, in this really, really boring lawyers' weekly thing called the Law. Oh, I shouldn't say that actually. feel kind of mean. Now, I've written for them since. The Law Society Gazette, at the time, doesn't sound very exciting, does it? But everyone read it because they had the jobs and the new law. So I saw this little ad on the back page which said, French-speaking lawyers wanted to go to Rwanda, contact Amnesty International. And I thought, Anyway, long story. I followed it up. It was a strange kind of series of phone calls and people never really knowing what the job was and referring me to something that just sounded more glamorous to me every time. So like Amnesty was like, well, we don't really know, but we've sent it to our mission in New York. And I was like, mission, New York, and then, we've sent it to the UN, et cetera, and I literally got a phone call. I'd been away for the weekend and I got back and one of my housemates said, the UN called from Geneva about a job. And I was like, yeah, right. And then I nearly did. And it was, so I went obviously, but it was to work in Rwanda after the genocide there with this UN human rights field operation, which was just sort of starting up as a thing that the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights did. So, and when I was preparing, so that was, amazing. But when I was preparing for that, I had a friend, actually, the only person I knew who worked in this sort of international world at all. I did have a friend that worked for UNHCR, the High Commissioner for Refugees, and she'd got into that by some circuitous route, and she'd been in Bosnia during the war, and she was then at the headquarters in Geneva. So I wrote to her and I said, she was working on Rwanda. I said, can you send me some stuff? And she sent me some materials, and I remember one of it was the statute of the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda. And I'd been doing like criminal law in London, defence, and working on things like the 1968 Theft Act. And I had this thing in front of me that said like genocide, intent to destroy a whole human group. And I just thought, yeah, you mean you can work on that? Wow. So that was the beginning. I mean, I went to Rwanda, I was there for a year. It was human rights work. I wasn't working with the tribunal, but I did end up at the Yugoslavia Tribunal in the very early days, and then in fact with the Rwanda Tribunal, and it was just hugely exciting. It felt really important because it was the beginning of a different kind of accountability for massive human rights violations, right? So before then, we talk about human rights law, and it's very important, and it can be, there are some human rights courts, and sometimes you can use human rights law in domestic courts, but often it would be like, so what do we do? And it's like, well, there is a special rapporteur that can write a report, and then, and suddenly there were these courts that were like trying people for these crimes. So it was very exciting to be there at the beginning of that. So fast forward a number of years, and I was then actually in a really different position at the Yugoslavia Tribunal. I'd been in Cambodia and doing completely different things, and I came back and accepted a job running the court rather than working on the cases. So I was what they called the deputy registrar. So I was doing things like getting the money at the UN and dealing, I was responsible for the detention centre, would you believe? But this, and legal aid system, and really kind of seeing how the courts worked, which was a really fascinating position, by the way. And as part of that, I was at a small meeting with people running international courts in East Africa. So there was the Rwanda Tribunal, but there were also people running courts or planning to run courts in domestically in Rwanda, in Kenya, and in Uganda. And it was a fascinating kind of couple of day workshop with us all together, kind of brainstorming best practices and so on. And we were addressed in that workshop by a woman who was talking about wildlife crime, because it was an East Africa focused event. And she did this devastating presentation about elephants. And really, we were like all in tears, it was amazing. And she said her appeal to us was like, can international criminal law help with this? We're desperate. And basically, the answer everyone kind of gave was like, well, not really, because international criminal law is so focused on humans. So I was just kind of brainstorming there, and I said, but if we could frame wildlife as part of the human environment. And as I was saying those words, I just started to think, oh my God, crimes against the environment. That is going to be an international crime. That is going to be an international crime. It's got
What year was there? What year was that?
This would have been like 2014, maybe. And I just thought, oh my God, that's going to happen. Crimes against the environment. And I want to help make that happen quicker. And I started talking to people and my friends and so on. And then someone sent me a video of Polly's TED talk and said, well, look, there's this woman who's doing this stuff. And I actually went to a show. I was living in Amsterdam. I went to the talk she was going. I met her afterwards. We spoke. I carried on basically trying to work on this. I mean, what I felt was like, what I can do here is I know international criminal law. Like I can do that bit's missing. The definition is missing. And I can help, I can do that. And I actually planned to pull together the kind of thing that Jojo's pulled together and just failed to do that because I had, these other jobs or wasn't focused enough or whatever. Until I came to, and I'm sorry, I feel like I'm going on too long, I'm nearly finished, until I landed where I am now at UCLA School of Law to set up this Human Rights Institute. And so I was really clear that I wanted us to focus on the environment. Human rights and the environment is one of our areas. And there are many reasons for that, not just my interest, but also the resources at UCLA School of Law, where we have a fantastic centre on environmental law. And so I started this project also, again, on looking at ecocide. And meanwhile, Jojo, as we'll hear, was doing her fantastic work. And through a number of mutual kind of friends and colleagues, we got connected. And, I heard about the panel that she was doing, and that just seemed to be, where it was going to happen. And so I was really delighted to be able to join forces, basically, in this project.
Yeah, the rest is history. You met Jojo, and the rest is history.
Yeah.
That's incredible. What strikes me, and we move to Jojo shortly, but it's that you always seem to have a passion and excitement and around human rights.
Yeah.
Was there anything that happened in your life that made you so connected on the issue of human rights and so persistent on it?
Yeah, I've thought about that. I think it's just it's my parents, really. It's my upbringing. It was always I come from a very politically committed family. My parents were like Labour Party members and activists, and I was just brought up in that environment. I went to, I was part of like Rock Against Racism when I was like 12, 13. I was, all that stuff, CND marches as I was growing up in the 80s. So it's just always been in my fabric, but obviously, and it's not in any kind of a worthy way. It's like, what's interesting, what's interesting is engaging with the world and trying to make it better. Like, that's exciting. That's where it's at. That's just always something that I thought is obviously what I would want to do and to be able to do in whatever way.
And I think a lot of people share that passion, that connection with human rights, but you have been able to build a career around that and also sustain yourself doing that. Is there any lesson along the way that you'd want to give to a young lawyer coming out or someone who's really passionate about human rights and actually wants to sustain themselves while doing the kind of work that you're doing? Any lesson you could give them as to?
Yeah, I mean, I feel incredibly fortunate. I think if I were to give any advice, and I do, because I'm now in a university, so I talk to students that want to work in human rights all the time. It's not an obvious path, right? It's not, especially for like looking at in law school. There are many obvious paths, and I personally was very frightened of ever getting stuck in one of those. That wasn't for me. There's no obvious path. You need to earn money. You need to survive. So my advice is just to be really alert to opportunities. I think that's the only thing, to really be sensing, what's out there and to follow any small little impulse of something that might lead to something else. I mean, that advert I told you that I saw on the back page of the Law Society Gazette, now I tore that out straight away and I left it next to my bed and I didn't do anything about it. And, after a couple of weeks, I was having a drink with a colleague from the law firm. And, he was saying, so what do we started to talk about what we really wanted to do. And I said, I'd like to work in human rights. And I said, actually, I did see this thing. And he said, well, have you called? And I said, no. And he actually gave me the push to do it. And I offered to But because that was what led to, you know, everything really. Opened a series of doors.
Wow.
So I think it's, you know, you do the thing that's most interesting to you at the time, and then just be aware, keep alert of other little opportunities, and whether that's a whole job or whether that's just something you can get involved in on the side and pursue. I think that's as much as we can do. And, you know, with luck, that will lead to where we all want to be.
Be present, listen to your gut, and you know, see the signals that are coming at you. Yeah, that's really good. That's really good. Jojo, Jojo, you are leading this movement. We all get excited when we meet you. That's how Future Law got involved. We met you and we're like, oh my God, this is incredible work. We want to be a part of it. We want to support this. You are passionate and really an incredible advocate for this. How did you become Jojo Mehta, chair of the Stop Ecocide Foundation, and, you know, so passionate about this movement?
So it's a very different kind of trajectory, I suppose, that I've had. And for me, the involvement in the environmental, for me, campaigning arena, because I came from the campaigning side, was relatively recent in terms of sort of really being active in that. It's just in the last sort of 6 or 7 years. But I would also agree with Kate in terms of going back to childhood, in terms of kind of setting that kind of internal compass a bit, because I mean, my parents are actually musicians and teachers, but my mother is who's a singer-songwriter, and I think, you know, wildly underknown. She's incredibly talented, but
Wow.
her inspiration was always the natural world, the earth, the seasons, but she was also very kind of activist with it as well. So I mean, she was writing kind of, you know, songs about nuclear power, you know, in the late 70s, and you know, and songs about the trees dying, you know, because of acid rain and things like this, you know, so that those elements were kind of in there from very young. And, you know, she used to take us for walks, and she was always pointing out the names of flowers and all this sort of thing. And through my teens and 20s, I think she was probably rather disappointed that I was really a city girl, and I did a lot of traveling. I worked in the travel industry to begin with. And it was only really coming back to the area I grew up in, which is a very beautiful area of the west of England, the Cotswolds, where I grew up, that I kind of really felt I was coming back to my roots. And a lot of that was to do with the landscape. So there was this really kind of strong sense of wanting to connect to the land. And I'd sort of been, I suppose you could say, an armchair activist for some years. I mean, I'd always kept a sort of interest in environmental issues, as well as some other issues around, for example, children's health and that sort of thing. And you know, signing petitions, clicking on things, that sort of thing. But what really kind of, you know, got me into my boots and onto the ground, if you like, was discovering about fracking. And in 2013, that was something that was already starting to be quite well established in some parts of the US, but nobody'd heard of it in the UK. And I was kind of switched onto this by a friend who'd been doing some online research. And the more I looked into it, the more I kind of felt, my God, this is insane. You know, this is an insane way of extracting resources. It's incredibly polluting. And it also seems to be really affecting the communities where it happens. And I couldn't believe that there were plans to potentially bring this to the UK. And I remember talking about it in my household and with friends. And my little daughter, who was 5 at the time, overheard me. And she burst into tears. And she said, Mummy, I don't understand. You know, if they're poisoning the ground, surely they understand that they're poisoning themselves. Can't you call them and tell them to stop? Because they're going to die. And I said, well, I'm not sure how much difference it's going to make me picking up the phone to one of these companies. And she said, well, in fact, we'd just been to the local ballot box. We just had local elections. And she said, Mummy, can't you talk to the voting man? And so I found myself in, like, my parliamentarian, my MP's surgery, you know, a week or two later, having this conversation with this very conservative MP, and feeling him kind of doing that classic politician thing of sort of sliding around all my questions and not answering me. And I remember coming out of that and thinking, that is never going to happen again. That is never going to happen again. I'm going to inform myself. I'm going to make sure that, you know, I have responses and that I don't let this happen again. And I got very involved in the anti-fracking movement in the UK as a result of that, and got, you know, did a huge amount of research and just really sort of got really got my hands into it and started organising things like local surveys and, information talks and all of that sort of thing. And it was around about that time that Polly Higgins moved to the area. And I'd come across her work. I'd read about her in the papers and talking about, ecocide should be made a crime, mass damage and destruction of nature should be made a crime. And I remember thinking, well, that's the biggest game in town. That would be great to be working on that. But obviously it didn't even occur to me that I would end up actually meeting Polly. And at the time she was doing some research around a possible case to do with fracking. And some mutual friends said, well, you need to talk to Jojo. She knows everything about that. And so we were put in touch. And it was one of those kind of kindred spirit moments where, literally we've been working with each other for a couple of hours and we were just like, this is great. Very similar kind of attitude to things, kind of very can do and fast moving and all of those things. And we just got on incredibly well. And we sort of worked very closely, but sort of in parallel for a few years. So I was really aware of what was going on behind the scenes with her work and vice versa. And she would give me legal advice and I would, we'd talk about the campaigning aspect of what she was doing. And it wasn't until 2017 that we started working together publicly, and we actually launched what is now the Stop Ecocide campaign. And it was very much a sort of joining of forces between, the legal and the campaigning sort of experience. And although, I'd been relatively new to that kind of game, I suppose I had experience from previous work as an entrepreneur and in the travel industry. I certainly had a lot of kind of skills that I brought to that table. And between us, we somehow launched this global campaign on what should have cost, I don't know, $500,000, and we managed to do it on about 50K just because of what we had sort of between us in terms of skills. And so, then we started working together much more closely. In a way, the rest is history in the sense that, as many potentially people watching will know, Polly's no longer with us. She had a very rapid and aggressive cancer in 2019, literally she was given 6 weeks, I think, by the time they diagnosed it. We just thought she had a kind of respiratory issue, but it turned out it was lung cancer, and that she was gone within a month. And I literally inherited the campaign, which was quite a sort of extraordinary thing, really. And when she got ill, there was this sort of sense where people were, there was a lot of communication from the community, and she was extraordinary about this happening. She was never afraid. She was never upset. She just, when she found out about it, she called me and we talked about it, and she said, Jojo, what are we going to do? She's like, we need to let everybody know. And then she said, well, and if this is what brings attention to this work, then so be it. Let's do it. Let's make as much of it as we can. And so those last few weeks, that was an extraordinary experience, actually. And we had a huge amount of communications in with people saying, what's going to happen to this work when, if Polly dies? And actually what actually happened was that when she did pass away, there was a huge kind of upsurge of support. I had loads of people contacting me saying, right, how can we help you make this happen? And it was almost as if while she was there, because she wasn't, as I later discovered, of course, meeting Kate and plenty of others, she was by no means the only person working on this, but she was very much the kind of inspiring figurehead for it. And so what I think happened was a lot of people felt that was what Polly was doing. And so they didn't necessarily feel that it was something that they needed to contribute to. And so when she passed away, there was this sudden kind of realization where actually this is really important. We've got to make sure that this actually happens. And so the extraordinary thing for me has been discovering over the last couple of years how many people were already committed in this arena, and how many, how much sort of will there was to actually come together and make it move forward. And so, it's been an extraordinary journey, actually, in that way.
Thanks for that. I'm looking at the time. But how can people listening in get involved with the work and support the work of Stop Ecocide Foundation, which was founded by Polly and yourself? How can people get involved?
Okay, there are a number of ways. I mean, there's a very obvious one, which is to go to our website, and I think it's being shown on the screen, and to sign the international petition in support, to potentially become a signed up member, where you become what we call an Earth Protector, and your name is visible on our Earth Protector list. And obviously, if you have your own followings, particularly if you have large followings, it's great if you can do that. But everybody has their own networks, and that's where the really key thing comes in, which is about conversation, because for us, this is very much about expanding a conversation so that every possible sector of society is potentially aware of this and talking about it, because ultimately that is what creates the public pressure, and that is what creates the political change, and that is what will therefore pressurize governments into wake them up to the fact that this is a really key issue, and one that needs addressing at the level of criminal law. So while we realize we may not have time, time is short, as we're being reminded by a number of key voices. Time is short for dealing with the crisis that we're in, and we may not have time for everybody to sign up to our particular campaign, but we certainly have time for everybody to be talking about ecocide. And so that is probably the single biggest thing that people can do, is talk about this. And I'd love to come back just briefly to what you said about what advice might you have, because what Kate said really reminded me of something, and it was actually a bit of advice from a journalist in the UK called George Monbiot, who his advice to people wanting to go into journalism, and it was very similar to what Kate said, is that you focus on what you're interested in. And actually, to begin with, I mean, certainly in my case, and with Polly and I both worked without salaries for a number of years. And we were lucky enough to have partners who, earned, enough, not lots, but enough to kind of, allow us to do that. But what he said, and what I completely agree with, is that if there's something that you're passionate about, focus on that and find a way to make it work, even if you're having to sort of skimp and scrape to survive to do it. Because actually what will emerge is that over time, you will be the people that you will be the one that people come to about that issue, because you will know more about it than anybody else. And that is exactly the position that I find myself in, and I believe Kate probably also to some extent finds herself in. I mean, I think she was probably a bit more established in her field than I was by quite some way. But at the same time, I think that persistence, that kind of sheer bloody mindedness, if you like, I think is a large part of what's brought us to where we are.
Oh my God, this is quite overwhelming. I knew it's going to be like that because it's a panel of 4 ladies. But thank you so much for bringing all these emotions and sharing the story. I mean, it's extremely personal to some extent, but at the same time, so needed. I kind of feel like whenever there's a huge issue that we would need to deal with globally and collectively, there is that lapse of responsibility. We want to be released of the responsibility and see someone taking the lead, while it is something that we should collectively deal with. And I'm actually glad that, whatever the occasion was and whatever the actions taken in the past, we are now more and more aware of how much we need to really work on it together. I'm actually seeing now in the chat, there's been a link shared, so whomever wants to sign up, you're more than welcome to actually sign up for Earth Protector as well. And let's work on it together as much as we can. Let's spread the rumor about the ecocide. Let's share the word. Whomever is watching us live on YouTube or Facebook, please like, please share. I think that this is worth listening twice. And you still have the option to actually jump in on board and sign in for the masterclass. So we're actually coming to the transition launch very closely. We're going to be taking a 15-minute break just because we want to be mindful of the digital tools that we are using today. It's kind of hard for people to keep focus and to really be present. So this transition launch, it's 15-minute break, get a cup of coffee, get relaxed, stretch, whatever you need to do, do some push-ups if you need. But we're actually going to be having a guided meditation here. You're going to hear Elisa's voice. I'm going to be switching to Vida, and she's going to be leading us through a breathing exercise. So we're going to be kind of mindfully present. And once we're back, we're going to be hearing Kate and Jojo going into the masterclass. So I hope that we will set this intention. And at the end, I hope that we're going to have many, many more signups and many more people willing to work with us together.
Yeah, and I want to say thanks to Kate and Jojo for this conversation, and to those viewing. We are going to be signing off very shortly. If you want to join us to get into deeper conversation with Jojo and Kate, the link is below, and we'll see you on the inside. Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Jojo.
Thank you.